Northern Europe, Scandinavian, Nordic countries, the culture tends to be more cooperative. Parental leave after a baby is born is given equally to both parents. And there are laws on the books, in Norway in particular, that the boards of private corporations, private companies in business to make a profit, they are to have half of their board of directors be women. Because the belief there is, what women and men do is interchangeable. You play to your strengths. You don't have to be what everybody else thinks a woman has to be, or what everyone else thinks a man has to be. Now, how does this shape nonverbals? A lot of gendered behavior we express nonverbally. A lot of gendered behavior has to do with what clothes you wear. It has to do with what kinds of humor do you use. A lot of that is nonverbal. Who is in charge? Who shows power or dominance? Who is soft and approachable and cares for other people? I know a lot of men who can be very soft and approachable and take care of other people. And I know a lot of women who can be powerful and dominant and very good leaders. So how those behaviors are divided between women and men depends on this quality in culture, or it can. So that gets us through the 5 value dimensions that we will refer to in future units. The final thing I want to do is talk about, very quickly, 5 channels, nonverbal channels, that tend to vary a lot by culture. We talked about culture and the traits that shape nonverbals. Now I'm coming at it from the other direction. Nonverbals that vary a lot by culture. The first of them is time. This is huge. A large part of the world runs on what we call event time. Event time. Most of the wealthy part of the world, Japan, the United States, much of Europe, runs on clock time. Clock time became popular as nations became industrialized because work shifts had to happen, had to start at the same time, meetings had to start at the same time. But in countries that are not as industrialized, things begin when they begin and they end when they end. And you can travel to a lot of parts of the world where it may seem to you like everybody runs late all the time. And really what they're doing, if they're having a conversation with someone and that relationship is important and that person has a need, they'll talk to that person until the need has been taken care of. And if someone else is waiting on them, they'll understand. And in a lot of places where they run on event time, they find it bizarre that you would let that phone in your pocket or that thing that hangs on the wall with all the numbers, that thing tells you what to do. They would say, I find other human beings more important than the numbers on my phone. So, we mentioned previously, use of time is a nonverbal. How much time you give to other people, whether you are early, late, or prompt. Very, very culturally different as you travel around the world. A second nonverbal channel that varies a lot by culture. There's a category of gesture that we call an emblem. That nonverbal. What does that mean here? Anyone? Yeah, come here. Come here. So it has a simple verbal translation. Emblems are gestures that have one translation. They mean one thing. Before we looked at as a picture this nonverbal. In the United States, you make the same shape like this. It means something very different. It effectively means daijoubu. It means okay. And that's the only thing it means. It doesn't mean anything else. And if you can be adults for just a second, this is a very rude gesture in the United States. It has exactly one meaning. Those are all emblems. And just as languages are different around the world, emblems are different around the world. This does not mean money in the United States. In France, this means zero. And a lot of people from the United States talking to people from France have been very confused. A third nonverbal channel that varies a lot by culture: emotional display rules. Emotional display rules. What emotions do you display, where, and for what purpose? We talked already about smiles and about the range between, say, Thailand and Russia. There are a lot of workplaces where you're expected to smile all the time, and it's part of your job. But you would also find that there are places in the world where that expectation would be completely unacceptable. The emotional display rules, there's huge variability as you travel around the world in what kinds of emotions are displayed in what situations for what meaning. Fourth, there's eye behavior. Eye behavior. This is another one where I said before the United States used to be called non-contact, but that's been changing. I've taught intercultural communication since the 1990s, almost 30 years. And back when I started teaching it, one of the things that was in all the textbooks about Japan was, if you ever travel to Japan, be sure you take nice shoes with you, because nobody will make eye contact with you. They all look at your shoes. Okay, I've been here coming up on 8 weeks. That has not been the case. A whole lot of people in Japan perfectly comfortable making eye contact with me. It's still in the published literature. The people in Japan avoid eye contact. They may be talking about on the train, where, yes, people do avoid eye contact because they're 2 inches from each other. But it is the case that around the world, eye behavior, there's a lot of variability. If you ever travel to the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and in some of the neighboring nations, they make much longer eye contact. It may look as though they're glaring at you. They're not. It's normal eye contact. And the fifth and final one, which we will come back to and mention. Oh, wait. I did have one more thing I wanted to say about eye contact. This is something, the difference in culture, I don't want you to think we're always talking about countries. There can be multiple people groups in one country whose eye behavior is different. In the United States, you might have heard news reporting about how troubled the relations are between the racial groups, in particular between Caucasian people and Black or African American people. Here's one thing that's about eye behavior. White children, and I was one, are raised that when you're in trouble and your parent is yelling at you, you look them in the eye. Commonly, Black or African American children are taught when you're in trouble and your parent is yelling at you, you do not look at them, you look down at the floor. If you look at them, it's rude. So what's happened a lot in the United States, school teachers who are white will go into schools where a lot of the children are Black, African American, and if the school teacher is correcting misbehavior and the Black children will not look her in the eye, then that teacher will say, these children, they don't care, they're apathetic, they don't listen to me. When the children are doing what their parents taught them to do, they're trying to be respectful. But because the eye behavior is different, it gets completely misunderstood. Last one. One that we mentioned previously, so it gets a quick mention. Personal space. How close you approach, how far apart. There is a biological component to it, but it also varies a lot depending on culture. There are different norms in different parts of the world. All right. So we've introduced the idea there's a biological root to a lot of it, which shouldn't be that surprising. We said last week, more simple life forms, animals, even insects, communicate nonverbally. And they do it based on instinct. But there's also a cultural root to a lot of nonverbals. So these are both ideas we'll come back to a lot in the weeks ahead. It is 11:25. If anybody has a question you want to ask that is a question that everybody ought to hear, about upcoming assignments, your assignments are still way off. Or anything about how the class works, this is a good moment. Does anyone have a question like that? I know I've been talking the whole 85 minutes. Okay, before I let class out, one thing that I said at the first class meeting, I was going to end class with. Last week, I got my head full of stuff and I skipped it. But the one expression of my religious faith, you're going to hear about 10 seconds of it every time the class meets. This is meant to wish you well. This is meant to send you out to go succeed and take over the world. It's also me trying to learn Japanese, so please be patient with me while I do this. Shu ga anata o shukufuku shi anata o mamoraremasu yoni. Shu ga mikao o anata ni terashi anata o megamaremasu yoni.